Previously, we looked at the removal of complete areas of graphite using Blu-Tack as an eraser, cutting basic shapes into existing areas of drawing and cleaning up small areas. Well, this time we'll look at more advanced and subtle uses that Blu-Tack shines at. But first, it's been pointed out that I haven't physically compared eraser types, so let's put that right. Using an art eraser is a popular way of creating white shapes like flyaway hairs and beards. And most artists will use a monotype or an art eraser, but it has its inherent problems, such as the smudging and softening of edges. You can see here how the graphite has been dragged out to both sides of the area. And it won't return the paper to pristine white, which is why I no longer use it. Although I have in the past sometimes used art erasers in large drawings, where soft edges were acceptable, such as this Old English sheepdog, which was a 76 cm or 30-inch high drawing. I cut a chisel end on a Stettler stick eraser and used it on the dog's legs. And at that scale, the erased clumps of hair with their soft edges suits the dog's appearance. But now I much prefer negative drawing. And if I want soft edges, I'll create them. So, dragging an eraser isn't ideal. Well, both kneadable erasers and Blu-Tack can solve that problem to varying degrees, because they can erase by being pressed onto the graphite. Both are malleable, easily pinched into a point or edge. That alone is an advantage over other types of eraser, because it offers greater accuracy. OK, with your eraser pinched into a sharp edge, don't press hard, just touch it to the graphite. Repeat with the Blu-Tack. Just touch and lift up to see what that simple action achieves. By the way, if you'd like to try Blu-Tack and are having problems sourcing it, it's available worldwide from my website shop. There's a link below. Now, where you might have had to use a little pressure with the kneadable eraser, Blu-Tack works with a simple light touch because it's a little stickier. And try it. Just have fun and experiment. Try different pinched edges, different shapes, short lines, longer lines formed by repeating short lines. Blu-Tack almost always produces the cleanest removal with the sharpest of edges, and it allows my drawing to develop like no other product ever has. Don't think of Blu-Tack or your kneadable eraser as being an eraser. It's an adjuster of values. It's the opposite of your pencil. You have two complementary tools that work together in harmony. Blu-Tack has become an integral part of the way I work because it offers a subtlety of result that drawing alone can't easily achieve. So keep watching because it's exceptional at suggesting background foliage, hairs and twigs in areas of deep shade, creating shapes anywhere that need to be cut into existing drawing. And it can even adjust the top layer of shading without affecting the one beneath it. Or gently fade an area until the intended value is reached. Here in early morn at Witten Marsh, the misty background trees were created with the used tortillon, a paper blender. But the trees at the left were adjusted with Blu-Tack until the recession appeared to be natural. It's a three-step process. First, draw all the trees as though they're in the foreground. Well, okay, I'm exaggerating for clarity here, but they can be dark enough to easily create the detail, some of which will subtly remain later. You have to bear in mind that we graphite artists don't have colour available. We can't add blue to suggest distance, so we often have to exaggerate recession. To make those trees appear to be further away, I need to enhance the atmospheric perspective. They need to be lightened, and the detail and contrast reduced. So, step 2 is to pull out a finger of Blu-Tack, and lightly stroke it over the trees and grass. And keep stroking as you push them into the midground. And you can refer to the dark values of the foreground tree to gauge how light the tree should be. And if you push anything too far back, simply pick up your pencil and bring it forwards again. As long as you use the Blu-Tack lightly, you should preserve the detail, so darkening again doesn't involve any extra thought or creativity. And if you only have a kneadable eraser, do the same. It will work, perhaps not as effectively. Then step 3 is to push the furthest tree deeper back into the background, along with the ground around it. You've exaggerated depth, but your story is crystal clear. Of course, in practical use, you would draw the midground and background trees progressively lighter. But this technique allows infinite adjustments to be made, as you can see here in the right-hand foliage of Connemara Encounter. This technique introduces a degree of spontaneity, which encourages happy accidents that can create something extraordinary, textures and forms that I hadn't consciously considered. And it can produce results that are so subtle they often can't be achieved by drawing alone. Even though flat face shading can produce very smooth results, lightly applying Blu-Tack can fine-tune the values in the most effective way. When here the darker areas were created with light 2B shading, with HB shading over it to smooth it out. Lighter areas had HB smoothed with 2H, and very light areas just 2H alone. And Blu-Tack is quite capable of gently adjusting any of those layers. For example, this shows the effect stroked Blu-Tack can achieve. Like the trees, this area was drawn darker so I could keep control of it. Then it was progressively lightened until it looked the way I wanted it to. And producing believable, very light detail with this method is much easier than trying to achieve it with just a pencil. Of course, it's possible to over-lighten it, but then I simply use my pencil to darken it before adjusting it again. When using the same technique, I use mid-values to draw the very subtle light details of these white coats. Then specific areas were lightened and fine-tuned with Blu-Tack and redrawn if I over-lightened. And I might repeat that process a few times, erasing, redrawing and erasing again, until it suddenly possesses the reality I'm trying to achieve. It's almost impossible to draw with that degree of finesse. Here, for instance, this area would have been drawn as dark as this. Creating the detail is then so much easier, and then I adjusted it with Blu-Tack to the level desired. The same here on top of this dog's head. And this area has barely any shading remaining at all, yet its absence was seen quite unnatural. And the great benefit of this technique, apart from giving superb results and infinite control, is that the detail itself is not harmed and all sharp edges are retained. Indeed, as I said before, Blu-Tack can even adjust the values of a top layer of shading without affecting the detail layer beneath it. Imagine this is part of a bear's chest that curves underneath into the shade. But I've over-applied the shading. It needs to be lightened where the light would reflect off the ribcage. Bearing in mind that the sharply drawn detail is in the tooth of the paper and the shading is on top of the tooth, a lightly stroked finger of Blu-Tack is quite capable of adjusting the value of the top layer without disturbing the layer beneath. But any eraser requiring a rubbing action cannot do this, but Blu-Tack can because it's slightly sticky. I mentioned in the previous video where I was restoring a key highlight to pristine white that I used Blu-Tack to create the secondary highlight in the iris. Oh, and that reminds me, if you're finding this one useful, please give it a like and consider subscribing so you don't miss out on future videos. Okay, the secondary highlight is the one emitted from inside the eye. the light hits the cornea, forming a key highlight. Part of that light is reflected directly into your eyes. That's why it appears to be so bright. But some of the light also enters the eye, and then as it passes through the internal liquid, it's refracted and spread. So it exits directly opposite the key highlight to form the soft secondary highlight. And that secondary highlight is created by gently stroking and adjusting the shading with Blu-Tack. If I don't like the result, I simply darken it before erasing again. Usually, I repeat that process a few times until it suddenly takes on the appearance that I expect it to look like in real life. In other words, it looks natural. The striking benefit of this technique, apart from giving great results, is that the detail is not harmed and all sharp edges remain sharp. Oh, and I can do this again and again because the striations in the iris were indented with a sharp 8H. So they remain intact as the layer above is gently faded. I think that's okay. So Blu-Tack is effective when used very lightly. And as I've already explained, it's just as efficient if I need to use it more aggressively. The merest touch leaves a clear, sharp-edged impression of any preformed shape. And that makes it exceptional at suggesting background foliage, or twigs, brambles and branches, and for making additions at a late stage. Having, for example, completed a section of foliage against a dark background, you might decide that that section possesses some imbalance. Now, the intention here was to hide the rabbit in the undergrowth to the point where it was not immediately noticeable, but it's too dominant, so changes had to be made. The rabbit needed more highlighted interest around it to distract the viewer's eye. So initially, shapes were cut into the dark depths with Blu-Tack. Its point roughly formed into triangular leaf shapes between my fingertips. Those leaves were then defined and detail added. But even more distraction was required, so more leaves were cut and shaped. The rabbit is still too conveniently framed. A new bramble was cut in with Blu-Tack pinched into a short knife edge, then repeatedly applied along the required length. And another. Then the narrow erased lines were sharpened and textured, but their shapes largely depended on the marks made by the Blu-Tack. I'm happy with this. I don't want the rabbit so well hidden that it's never found. And all that took was a touch or two of preformed Blu-Tack to quickly add mid-ground foliage. A more determined touch or series of touches can even take 6B almost back to white if further foreground foliage is desired. If you try Blu-Tack, remember, new Blu-Tack might disappoint you. It's rather stiff and improves with age, use and warmth. So I keep one ball in my hand and another on my drawing board. That one stays cooler and maintains an edge or point for longer. And the warm ball I'm holding is slightly softer and stickier and removes more graphite. So always use a light touch, because Blu-Tack rarely needs to be pressed into the surface. And as it picks up graphite right out of the tooth, it causes no damage to your paper. So an erased area can safely be drawn onto again. And finally, to clean it, just pull it into a long rope and ball it up again. You know, even if you don't try Blu-Tack, almost everything I've mentioned should be possible to some extent with a good kneadable eraser. Possibly not as well, but give it a try. And if you have tried Blu-Tack, let us know your favourite uses of it in the comments. Well, thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon.